Hello and welcome to Pieces in Action Verb podcast. I'm here with Kathy Kramer. And so, Kathy, I am going to introduce you the way I've been introducing my other guests, which is a little bit about how I know you. So, you and I were just reminiscing that we've known each other for something around 22 years, and that we first met when I was getting started at the water board and you were with SFEI. And so we're here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So SFBI is a research entity, nonprofit that's very tied in with tracking whether water quality regulations are working. And I was at the Water Board, which is the entity that issues the water quality regulations. So that's how we met. And then I watched and participated as you started to launch the Bringing Back the Natives garden tours. And so basically, that's how I know you. And I want to invite you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. I'm delighted to be here. And I was going to start more at the beginning of and kind of give an overview of my career and how I got to the garden tour, if that's all right.
I love it. So I think we're just going to launch right into the interview in that case. As you can take us
Okay.
back to the beginning.
All right. So this invitation to participate in this program got me thinking about the various steps that I took on the way to where I am, which is, running a native plant garden tour for nearly the last 20 years. And the first things I think that worked for me or that happened to me was imagination and dreaming. So when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I didn't know what I wanted to do. For a while, I thought I would be a history major. For a while, I thought I would be a music major. And I did the What Color is Your Parachute book. I read it and I worked on the essays with just what did you think that you wanted, even though as a young person, I didn't even know.
So sorry, just let me interrupt you for a moment there. You and I are both familiar with this book. For people who have never heard of it before, can you tell us a little bit about what it is? What
It
color
was
is your
one of the
parachute?
first or one of the very early books that came out to help people think about their lives and their skills and their interests and their desires and what they would feel that they wanted to do themselves without being pushed into being a lawyer or something, but to really think about what did you want to accomplish and achieve in your life and what were your skills and how could you get there? How could you think about where you wanted to go and get there?
So
Uh,
so a parachute, which is what keeps you from landing flat on the ground.
yes.
It's like, how are you going to stay safe and keep a roof over your head and meet your financial security needs while also bringing your special gifts and life purpose to bear?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at that time, even though I didn't know what I would wind up doing, I found my worksheets 10 years later. And I
Wow.
found that I had really gotten the job that I had been thinking of, even though I didn't know what it was when I was
Wow.
20. I had said that I wanted a job that would allow me to work both outside and inside
Mhm.
somewhat, that I wanted some autonomy and responsibility in my work, something like an EMT, though I didn't think about that, where you're thinking on your feet and you're working on your own. And then I wanted to work with fun and bright people. Those were the things that I remember saying. And I
Hmm.
wound up getting a job working in a nonprofit up here in the San Francisco Bay Area that was really very much like that. My coworkers were bright, fun people, and my work was very interesting, and I had a lot of autonomy, and I've just had a wonderful career. So
Sorry to interrupt you, but you set an intention. So you thought about it, you really got into that. I don't know what I want, but I think I want this. And then they were these very a generalized wish list. And then you find yourself 10 years later looking around and there you are. The details populated, right? There became more meat on the bones, so to speak, but the skeleton you had come up with in that intention setting exercise.
exactly, even though I didn't know what it would turn out to be. And I
Yeah.
had a friend many years later who said, let's think, Kathy, about what we want to do in 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years. Just where do we wish we would be? What do we wish our lives would be like at those ages? And she said she thought that if we had those ideas in our mind, that we would just subconsciously be making decisions that would help us get
Hmm.
there. Even
Mhm.
though we didn't know what the there was. Maybe I want to be comfortably retired, or maybe I want to be, still hard charging in my career, or maybe I want to be married with kids, or whatever it would be. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting exercise. So that was kind of what got me started on my path in my career.
Very cool. Very cool. So that was in your 20s, and then you basically fast forwarded us to your 30s. Was there anything you wanted to share about like how you got from 20 to 30?
I do. So I left home at 18. I had a tempestuous teenage years, and I have joked that I went from Southern California, from Los Angeles to Australia when I was 18, which I joke was as far as I could get from my mother without getting closer again. My mother and I wound up being on very good terms later on, but in my teens, it was hard. And I
That's
didn't
pretty
want
funny.
it.
I'm sorry because I'm realizing yes, we're on a round planet. So you didn't try to go to Jupiter or the moon. You were thinking like, okay, I'm still on planet Earth, and wait, oh, I've got to stop in Australia.
So I wound up being on good terms with my mom later on. But at that time, I just wanted to get out of the house and do something different and be in a bit different place and, have a different life. And so I wound up living overseas for 6 years, from 18 to 30. I would be away for a year, and then I'd come home and I'd live back with my mom and my stepfather for a year, and then I'd go away for a year. So I spent 3 years in the Caribbean and 3 years between Australia and New Zealand. And then I kind of
Wow.
dog trotted around the Central America, um, Southeast Asia, Asia Minor, the South Pacific, and Europe. And
Wow. So you saw a lot of the world, and as a young woman, just already really independent, just
yes,
able to take care of yourself, watch out for yourself, explore.
and travel is such a marvelous thing. Like in my life, I think it's helped me. I think that my, kind of wild youth and my kind of extreme travels helped me to be a workhorse later. Like I felt like
Mm,
when I was 30 and was working full time and had a husband and a house and children, I felt like it's okay. I can do this because I'd had all the fun that I needed to have. I'd been
mm,
almost everywhere I wanted to go. I'd
mhm.
eaten almost everything I wanted to eat. I'd done almost everything I wanted to do. And so it was okay for me to just work hard and have work be the focus of my life for a long.
Yeah. Yeah, I admire your ability to do that. I often realized in my own graduate studies that I should have done that because I wasn't at 24 ready to focus and try to knock out an advanced degree. I should have been having fun. I think people in their 20s should be having fun. I think that's really smart way to go.
Having fun and also just getting an exposure to the world and to life. Like now when I look at like a magazine like The Week and I see a little something on something around the world, I realize like, oh, I've been there. I remember that, I've been to that
Yeah.
city. And so it has
Yeah.
much more meaning for me. And also you just, I came upon my career. I finally realized what I wanted to do when I was 26 and working in the Caribbean. And it took that long for me to figure out finally like what was the thing that I really wanted to study in school and focus on and build a career over. And so I think travel is just a marvelous thing, and more people should think about just like breaking out of the path, the normal path, and do
Mm.
it.
So it's useful. I think that is definitely a theme that is coming up in these conversations, and it's so helpful to hear from people that have broken out of the path because we can't all be the path forgers. A lot of us, most of us, have to be a path follower of some sort. So you're saying, all right, well, here was my path. I set my intentions in a really broad kind of a way, and then I went out and explored. And you worked along the way. You kept yourself fed
I
and
did.
and
Yeah, I
clothed and
funded all my
housed.
trips. I would come
Yeah.
home and I would work as a waitress. It was great money at the time. And I would go to school at junior college and I would take classes that would prepare me for my next trip. Like before I
Oh
went to
wow.
Europe, I took German, which seems like a language that would be useful in lots of places. It was really useful when I was in Turkey, for example,
Interesting.
because there are a lot of uh, people from Turkey would go to Germany to work. So German was a good language. I took history of Western civilization, A and B, and I took art history so I could go to museums and know what I wanted. And I would save
Wow.
the money. And then I also worked when I was overseas.
Wow. Well, thank you for giving us a little sense of that pathway. I think that's inspiring to people that are listening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So finally, when I was 26, I was working as a scuba diver in the Caribbean, and I finally realized, okay, this is the thing that I want to do. I don't want to be like the volunteer scuba diver or like the poorly paid scuba diver. I want to be that researcher who's like planning the trip to
Mm,
Jamaica or whatever it is, and
mhm.
have a real job and earning a real salary. So I came back to Los Angeles and I went back to college. I'd been in college for a long time. I started college when I was 15, just taking classes in and out and in and out for
Mm.
many years, but then I had a goal finally, and it took me 4 years to be able to get my degree. So I was 30 by the time I graduated because I was behind in my maths and sciences. And math had always been very hard for me. I'm how old am I? I'm almost 66 now. So when I was in middle school, the new math came in, and I don't think the teachers really know what they were teaching. And my
Mm.
father, who was great at math, he couldn't really help me because he didn't know like how they were teaching it. And I think I just got like math phobic in my middle school years. I don't know why. Anyway, it's just like been with me all of my life that
Mm.
technical things and
Mhm.
mathematical things are hard for me. So when I went to college to get a degree in marine biology, taking physics and chemistry and the sciences and the maths were just so hard on me. And the verbs
But
that I
just sorry, sorry to interrupt. You're about to tell me the verb, but you had a passion and a focus and a dream and a reason. And so then all of these things that were hard, it was like, well, okay, it's hard, but I know why I'm slogging through this. I know why I'm putting myself through this torture because I have this goal. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were
no,
about to get into a piece verb.
it's true. That's it. So the verbs that I had for this time, like going back to college as a 26-year-old and living at home between 26 and 30, like that wasn't so always so easy. Were hard work and tenacity for those
Yes.
college years.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the sort of the next, college year story, I think, is that it was so hard for me that I lost my confidence for a while. And I felt
Mm,
like I can't do this. It's
mm,
just too hard. It shouldn't be this hard. If this is supposed to be my career, it shouldn't be this hard for me.
mm.
And so my verbs for that, my kind of larger verbs were reach out to others and ask for help, and also accept encouragement and help. Because when I had my lack of confidence, what I thought, what I joked was, I was truly in middle school, I was in academically talented programs, and they didn't really
Yeah.
know what to do with kids in their AT programs. So I took classes on Saturday, and I started high school early. I started college when I was 15. I graduated early from high school, but then when I was struggling in college with, physics and chemistry and pre-calculus, I felt like I was in some kind of awful experiment. And I felt like when
Huh.
I was in middle school, that some researchers had picked out smart kids and they picked out dumb kids, and they were following us throughout our lives. And that
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
really one of the
Yeah.
dumb kids that they were watching. And I thought, some researcher is like watching me right now and like slapping his leg and thinking, can you believe she is trying to get through pre-calculus? And I said to friends, like, it just shouldn't be this hard for me. Maybe I'm in the wrong career. Maybe I should do something else that, suits me better. That's not so hard.
And
And so,
so sorry, you're about to say something again, but I'm jumping in because I want to say like the importance of letting go of labels, like the smart kid, the dumb kid, right? Like the importance of just letting oneself have an experience. This is easy, this is hard. And then to ask yourself, It's hard. Does that mean I'm supposed to quit? It's hard. Does that mean I'm following the right path? And then pause a moment there and listen to yourself internally because you could have just said, it was hard. I switched gears. But I'm hearing you're about to say, it was hard. I reached out for help. I accepted help. And
yeah,
the importance of that pause before just quitting and the pause before making yourself wrong, but then allowing that doubt to creep through and you even brought a little sense of humor in it. You're like, somebody's watching me and slapping their knee, right? Like, so you're also keeping some lightheartedness to what was probably a really difficult time in life.
it was difficult. And so many people helped me, like my friend Lisa Farrar. We were in study groups together in chemistry. I always found people to study with for the hard classes. My friend Bonnie, she was really my mother's age, and we'd been friends for a long time. And when I said to Bonnie, like, I don't know if I can do this, she said, no, you can. And I hadn't yet gotten my AA, my associate's degree, my 2-year degree. And she said, really get that out of the way. So she researched the classes that I still need to take. And then she took them with me. She said, oh, I need to take them too, whether she did or not.
Oh, how
But we
sweet.
took like
Yeah.
political science together, and we took, another science class together. And, she just encouraged me to like get my 2-year degree and continue on.
To
My
hit that
friend,
milestone,
yeah,
to cross something off of your list.
yes, exactly. And like move me on the way. Like I needed to get those things done. And she just like helped me, very graciously helped me. get them done. My friend Bob Given, he was director of the Marine Science Lab on Catalina. He had a doctorate and he was
Mhm.
so good in school. And he just said, "Oh, it's just a weeding out process. Like, don't get weeded out. Just get through it. All you have to do is just pass." My friend Dale Sweetnam, he was doing his marine research on Catalina, where I volunteered in the hyperbaric chamber. And I would call him up at his job at the Department of Fish and Game at that time, the Department of Fish and Wildlife now. And when he would pick up the phone, I would say, "Hello, is this the trigonometry hotline?" And he would say, "Miss Kramer, how are you?" And I would say, "Fine, but I'm stuck on problem 3C." And so we would
Oh,
like go over my trigonometry
how
together.
fun. Oh my gosh. So you because you were already good at adventuring, you were good at meeting people
Yeah.
and you were good at volunteering and putting yourself in places you wanted to be. And so you met these people that could then mentor you. And
Yes.
then you had fun with it, like how cute the trigonometry hotline. Like that, yeah. I love it. So so you
If I called him today, he would know who it was. And then there were a number of PhD students and master students from, I forget if it was USC or UCLA, I forget, who would come over to Catalina to do their marine research. And so we would have dinner together and we'd have geometry dinner parties and work out my problems. And then a retired physics teacher, a high school physics teacher, he helped me. I would drive like a half an hour to his house and we would do my homework
yeah,
together. So I
yeah.
got a lot of help.
Yeah,
And
but you didn't just get a lot of help. You actively sought and then you had fun with and you received and you obviously were showing a lot of gratitude through that process because people apparently were delighted to help you and found fun ways to do it.
yeah, yeah. So all those things are true. And I persevered. And when I was 30, I finally got my Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology from Cal State Long Beach. And my parents, who had a bitter divorce 15 years before and had not spoken, they both came to my graduation ceremony. It was such a big deal that I
Wow.
finally got through school. And they
Wow.
sat like with just my sister between them. And I've joked to my sister that if I would go on and get an advanced degree, they would probably get remarried and start a new family. Like it was such a big deal that I finally graduated.
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. I know it's like way, way long ago, but congratulations. That's really, really cool.
Thank you. It was. So my next a long verb was seek out opportunities and take chances. So after I finished getting my degree, I realized that before I'd gotten it, because I'd worked as a scuba diver for about 5 years all over the world, I
Hmm,
could have gotten any diving job I wanted, making, $6 an hour. And after
hmm.
my degree, 4 long, hard years later, I could get any diving job I wanted, making $6 an hour. Like a bachelor's degree in marine biology was not worth a lot.
Wow. Wow.
And I wound up going back one day to Cal State Long Beach, and I saw a bulletin board posting for an internship through a nonprofit that helped place people in the environmental field.
Hmm,
And I didn't have really any work, well, sort of formal work experience. I had a great diving resume.
mhm,
So I applied to this nonprofit and they suggested that I check out working with the San Francisco Estuary Institute, which is the nonprofit that Christine mentioned that
mhm,
does research and monitoring on pollutants in the San Francisco Bay and Delta.
mhm.
And I had a phone interview and they hired me over the phone.
Wow.
I'm in work from Los Angeles to San Francisco, which meant that I had to quit my job in Los Angeles and, for a 6-month internship. And I wasn't sure really about it. I thought they could be short, fat chain smoker, this guy who hired me. He was actually an avid scuba diver himself, Dave Phillips. And that was why he thought my resume was interesting. But he turned out to be a tall, thin chain smoker. So I took the job. I
Wait,
came up.
how did you know the chain smoker part? Did he have a raspy voice? Like, how did
I
you
flew
have it?
up. I thought
Oh,
I can't quit my job and like move up here for over a telephone interview. So even
yeah.
though I wasn't required, I flew up and met with them on the Richmond
Okay.
Field Station where I wound up working for 14 years
Yeah.
and realized, it was a great opportunity and they were interesting and nice people and, that it
Yeah.
was worth you know, shaking out my life and getting out of Los Angeles and trying this new thing up here in San Francisco. So
So there's a little bit of self-care smarts that you're also demonstrating. So you're like, you, well, going back to your friend who said, let's look at the 5, 10, 20-year, 15, 20-year plan. And then subconsciously that will make decisions that help us get there. And so I think there's probably also being on the lookout, right? So you're like, I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't want to go back to $6 an hour. What the heck? I just did, this long grueling schooling. But you were on the lookout, you saw, you called, you had the interview, but then you're like, well, wait a second. I'm going to exercise self-care here and fly up and make sure this is going to be good for me. So you met them in person. And it was.
That's true. And being on the lookout is such a good way to put it because earlier in my mid-20s, I got a grant from I can't remember. Something again that I saw on a bulletin board at my junior college, and I wound up doing marine research in the Grenadines. Oh, it was environmental. No, I forget what it was. Anyway, it was something I saw on the bulletin board and junior college, and this was something I saw on the bulletin board at Cal State Long Beach, and just like keeping your eyes peeled for things that could be interesting, and leaning into them, like pursuing them, checking them out. That served me really well in my life.
And I love that you and I have the same vernacular here. We're both American English speakers, and so on the lookout, right? Like you're surveying and keeping your eyes for what might be coming your way, but you're keeping your eyes peeled, which
Mhm.
means you're not blinking, right? So I just wanted to translate that I don't know if British people say that or Australian people say that, but that's what that means. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. The next verbs that I had in my list were hard work.
Mm,
So I got my internship up here. I was the only woman on the technical staff. I was the fifth person hired at SFEI. I was the least educated. I was the poorest paid. I knew tropical reefs if I knew anything. I didn't know anything about pollutants in a cold water estuary.
mm.
So I worked very hard. I read reports. I attended conferences. At night, I came home and I memorized all the acronyms, the ACE for the Army Corps of Engineers. There are so many government agencies up here that all had their acronyms. And I really worked hard in those years.
It's
Uh,
definitely alphabet soup in this world, isn't it? It's a lot of initials of long things that people don't want to keep saying over and over again.
yeah. So that time of being like a new person on staff was really a lot of work. And uh, the next sort of long verb that I have is rise to the challenge. And so because let's say we step back and say, we know each other because of water pollution activities.
Yes.
So the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. It was the federal government deciding we have to clean up our nation's waters. And for the first 15 years after the passage of the Clean Water Act, government focused its attention on removing pollutants from point source discharges, like big pipes, like
Big
a
pipes.
refinery or a sewage treatment plant. And
Right.
they spent billions and billions of dollars to remove those kind of pollutants.
And to set
Um,
standards for that, to say this is the concentration that's allowable, this is the concentration above which you're going to get some kind of a penalty. So they put numbers on it.
Yeah. So that was where the attention was at first. But in the late 1980s, the agencies began turning their attention to non-point source
Mm.
pollution. And that's the kind of pollution that comes from all over. You can't track it down to one big pipe. It's the kind of pollution that all of us generate every day without even thinking about it by driving our cars, and the brake pad, the copper that comes off of brake pads, or the rubber that comes off of our tires, the pesticides we use in our gardens, the litter that,
The
rolls
pet
down our streets
waste,
and goes into creeks in the bay.
the pet waste, fertilizers.
Exactly. So when the federal government turned to the state Water Resources Control Board, which was the parent agency that Christine worked for, the local agencies turned to the cities and counties and began putting obligations to reduce non-point source pollution onto the public works agencies at cities and counties.
Mm.
And it was hard for those people because they were mostly men and they had been trained as engineers. They wanted to culvert creeks and control flooding and build bridges. They didn't know anything about public education and environmental education. So they contracted a lot of that work out.
Mm.
And I was in the right place at the right time. And there were two men, Ralph Johnson and Shelley Sack from Alameda County
Mm.
Public Works Agency, who had faith in me and offered me a $70,000 contract as I was working for this nonprofit to develop a program on non-point source pollution reduction that would fulfill the requirements that they were
Wow.
obliged fulfill.
Wow. So at this point, were you still in your 6-month internship period, or you had gotten hired on full time with
I got hired on
SFEI?
full time.
Okay.
Chevron actually gave my 6-month internship ended, and there was no more funding to hire me. And Chevron provided the nonprofit with a $5,000 grant to like kind of get me on board and tide me over. And then they hired me full time. And I
Nice.
was an environmental analyst for a while, or something along that line. And then I was communications director, like moving me into kind of the softer side of this science-based organization. And then I became after a while, I became their education director.
Right. Okay. And so then Alameda Clean Water, so the Alameda Countywide Clean Water Program basically wasn't even existing yet. And so the Public Works Department noticed you, recognized your capacity, and said, "Hey, Kathy, can you help us get this program started?"
It was actually the clean water program that gave me that contract. You know, it was a consortium of cities and unincorporated areas together. But it was through the clean water program. But it was Ralph and Shelley that, like, you know, selected me and got me this contract and gave me kind of carte blanche to just figure out what I wanted, what could be done, what
Hmm.
could I do.
Hmm.
And so the next series of verbs that I have were learn, grow, persist, try, and work hard. So I
They
had this,
definitely, that's a good package combination, right? Those verbs really live together well.
yes. So I had this big opportunity and this big responsibility to do something that would be effective. And I had no training in environmental education or non-point source pollution prevention. So I went up to Seattle, and in Seattle, they're very progressive. They seem to be ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
Portland also ahead of us in their public outreach activities and non-point source pollution reduction. So I went there for, I don't know, a few years, maybe for like 4 or so days, and 5 days each year, I would set up interviews with, you know, everybody I could find who seemed to be doing exciting and interesting programs.
Wow. So you were doing informational interviews. So you'd figure like, so the internet has grown uh, with us, with our professional careers, right? And so at this point in time, was that a Google search? What was that? Was that how did you find these people?
I don't even know. It was so long ago. It was like 1989 or something, 1990.
So the World
I
Wide
don't even
Web
know how
maybe
I found
wasn't
it.
even like, yeah, how did you do it?
I don't even know. The internet wasn't even a thing at that time. We were just kind of
Were there
emailing each other.
journal articles? Were you reading journal articles in maybe WEF or
I was attending environmental education conferences. Maybe I came across,
yeah.
you know, a couple people there, and then I would call them up and I would ask them about their programs, and I would ask them if I could meet with them. And then I would say, who else do you think I should meet with? And
Okay. So it
they
was a
would have other
networking.
recommendations. Yeah. And then I would
Yeah.
go and maybe meet with like 5 or so, you know, people over the course of a day and grill
Yeah.
them about their programs. What were they doing? How did it work? How did they
Yeah.
assess it? What kinds of materials do they have? I would collect their materials, and I had filing cabinets full of materials on, you know, programs that they had developed up there. So I have joked that I never had an original idea, really. I would just get my ideas from Seattle and then come back and implement them down
But
here.
the beauty that you brought to it was the initiative and the resourcefulness to figure out who to talk to, and then I mean, it's not necessarily easy to go up and shake a hand of someone you've never met, and or to call them cold on the phone, but you did it. You put
Yeah.
yourself out there, so to speak. You did it.
And people are, you know, people who are proud of their work, I think, are generally like happy to share what they've done and help a new person along. And
Yeah.
you know, they were also committed to the environment and wanted to see things happen. And they were very generous with their time and materials. I met with some of them, like, you know, multiple times over the course of the years, and
Hmm.
got so many great ideas and so much help from them.
That's wonderful. So it was really it was an act of generosity on their part that was fueled by just an interest of let's protect water. This matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then for the next 15 years in my nonprofit work world, I developed a series of environmental education programs that focused on protecting water quality and on habitat and water conservation. Um, I also, at that time, formed a nonprofit. So I left the nonprofit I'd been working for, the San Francisco Estuary Institute, which was focused on research and monitoring on pollutants in the Delta.
Mhm.
but I was growing this education program, and it was
Mhm.
of secondary interest of them, but it was of
Right.
primary interest to me. So
Ah,
I formed a new nonprofit, which was then called the Aquatic Outreach Institute, but it's
that's I
still in
think when I
existence.
met you. Yeah, Aquatic Outreach Institute is I think when I came on the scene.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that was 1996, and it's still existing today under a new name. It's now called the Watershed Project, and still runs many of the same programs that were developed when I was there and started it.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we developed a series of programs at that nonprofit, the Kids in Creeks program. It was a teacher education program to get teachers working with their students out of the classrooms, looking at the creeks that flowed near their schools. They were a weekend long workshops, or maybe even longer than a weekend. And teachers were very excited. We were the crest of the wave, because there wasn't that kind of program then, that got teachers out of their classrooms. And we provided them with maps of their local creeks that we got from the local public works agency, and showed where the
Mhm.
creeks were above ground, and
Mhm.
found them test monitoring kits that they could use to look at dissolved oxygen and pH. And we did aquatic insect monitoring, and
Mhm.
that was a really popular program. We also developed kids in marshes, kids in gardens, and then we started a number of uh, watershed awareness programs, is what we called them. But we started the Friends of San Leandro Creek,
Oh,
and we
yeah.
started the Friends of Sawsell Creek, and we started Spawners, which is a group on San Pablo Creek here in
Mhm.
Contra Costa County.
Mhm.
So we would, do the research on each of those creeks, and hold the community meetings, and get people together and ask what they were interested in accomplishing, and then served as their staff for generally 3 years for each program, to like help them build databases and develop outreach and materials, and do some grant proposal writing, and hold meetings, and garner public interest, and just keep going. And so all
Mhm.
those groups have continued on. Today they're more than 20 years old, each of them.
And so you basically help them set up the framework and do the heavy lifting and organization and the mechanisms that a group like that needs to get the funding and to be self-sustaining. So you were starting them up and
Yes.
seeding them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're definitely known entities. Like those organizations, like you said, 20 years in are still out there doing great things.
Yes, and the Friends of Sassel Creek in particular have just been fantastic at doing creek restoration work, and building capacity, setting up their own native plant nursery. Like, they're really one of the prides of my career.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Then let's see. So now we're finally getting to the garden tour. I resigned in 2002. I had a little boy. He was 2, and it was hard being an executive director and a mom at the same time. And I was tired. So I left the Aquatic Outreach Institute. And then I wondered for some time, like, who was I at this point? I had been such a workhorse for so long, so driven by my career, so engaged in what I was doing, and proud of our work and hiring staff, and all of the stress that went with starting and running a nonprofit, and being responsible for ensuring that I had the money coming into these nonprofits to pay the people that I had hired, and we were producing the work that we were contracted to do. It was a lot.
That is a
So
lot. I mean, it's a lot like being a consultant, but on soft money.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did a little consulting for a couple of years for the California Native Plant Society and the Friends of Sassel Creek, and spent time with my son. And then somehow, I don't even really know how, I came up with the idea of starting a native plant garden tour.
Well, could
And
it have been? I mean, you say you don't really know how, and yet somewhere in there you must have realized people can do this if they can see it.
okay, so I do know how. So that's a whole other story. That story, I was thinking, starts really with storytelling. And so when I first moved up here 30 years ago, 35 years ago now, to the Bay Area, Malcolm Margolin, who started Heyday Books, he was speaking a lot then, and he was a hypnotic speaker.
Mhm.
And did you ever hear him, Christine?
I know the name. I recognize the name, and I don't know if I ever heard him.
Well, he wrote The Ohlone Way and Thomas Jefferson Mayfield, which is another terrific book about Native American life before Europeans came. But he was just a fabulous speaker, and he just painted pictures of
Mm,
what the Bay Area was like before the arrival of Europeans,
mhm.
how birds would darken the sky for days on end as they were migrating north and south, how
Wow.
the creeks, you could walk across the backs of the creeks on the salmon that were migrating upstream and not get your feet wet.
Mm,
How there's a quote from a um, early European who came here, how he was crossing Mare Island and saw 2,000 tule elk swimming across the channel. It was, he said, a grand and glorious sight. How people, early Europeans said they were almost deafened by the sound of migrating birds, like being startled and taking off, how you could shoot into the sky and drop like numerous birds at once. There were just so many.
mm.
Um, it was,
That's wondrous and heartbreaking all at the same time.
it is, it's what actually has driven me through my career because I've felt like that I myself would never live in a place where salmon could migrate upstream. And the idea that they could do it, that's what they did in Seattle, was promote the idea of like, we could restore these creeks for salmon. I felt like I want to be part of that. I want to be part of making this a better place to live.
So you
And
envisioned, you envisioned,
yes,
and that was supported by and introduced by the story that you heard, the storytelling.
exactly. And part of that envisioning and was thinking, I also read Noah's Garden by Sarah Stein. Um, it was a great, like, simple book. She was a good writer. It's easy to read. You can get it on Amazon for $3, I think. But she talked about her own experience with her yard and creating habitat in her yard. And I felt like I wanted to take the little bit of habitat that I could control, my
Mm,
front yard and my backyard. And I wanted to make up for my house and the library and the roads and the grocery stores and the schools and all the things that I used that had destroyed habitat. I wanted to create some habitat.
so you were looking at what's in my control.
At what?
What's in my control?
Yes,
What is within
exactly.
my realm of being able to make an impact and letting it be small and starting with what you have?
Yes. And so, like 30 odd years ago, when I started looking into doing this, it was so hard because there just weren't resources available. You couldn't find a consultant to help you select plants. There weren't native plant nurseries where you could go to buy them. There weren't places where you could go to see them. You couldn't see
Oh,
plant lists of people who were gardening. It was just like I had this dream that I wanted to, recreate some bit of nature here on my lot in San Pablo, and it was very hard. Oh, I got books like Gardening with Native Plants, but those books were often, native plants from the San Diego border to the Oregon border to the Sierras, and so
and California is actually full of microhabitats. Like this is such a varied collection of ecosystems that you can't say what works in the Mojave works in San Leandro. That's impossible.
exactly. So I made mistakes. Like I bought a California lilac, a Ceanothus hirstiorum, and it died. And then I said to somebody, so my Ceanothus hirstiorum died. And they said, of course it died. Like it's Ceanothus hirstiorum. It's from San Simeon. It wants the cool ocean air. It never would do well on my hot, dry lot in San Pablo. And
Yeah,
I realized
yeah.
like, oh, you really, you need to select plants properly. You want
Mhm.
local native plants. So it was a very hard journey. And
Was it a
so
little
here's,
bit like being in school? Sorry to interrupt you again, but like, so you'd had this experience in school where you're like, this is hard. Am I supposed to quit? Oh, no, I'm supposed to reach out for help. So was it like that again?
it was, only it was just hard to find help. So at that time, well, when I first bought my house, 30, almost 35 years ago, there was really kind of nothing growing in the yards but weeds and dry, hard clay. And I put in a lawn, and my stepmother had grown roses in Los Angeles, and they were beautiful. So I asked her what kind of roses she had, and I planted those roses. I was a single at that time, and it was, hard planting roses. They're kind of big, and you have to dig big holes. Like it was a hard work doing that. I
Mm,
put in my lawn of roses, and I felt like, okay, I've done what I should do as a new homeowner.
mhm,
Then I
mhm.
realized, oh, I'm working for a nonprofit in, the environmental field in water. I should, think about water conserving plants. So I contacted our local water district, East Bay Mud, and I got their list of plants, and they
Mhm.
said, they sent me their list, and I realized, of course, I should have these plants. So I took out the roses and I took out the lawn and I put in East Bay Mud's recommended list. But
Mm,
I realized later, and then I felt satisfied again, like, okay, I've done the
mm,
right thing now, with my yard. But then later on, I met somebody who was active with the California Native Plant Society, and I realized, like, oh, I really want California native plants in my yard.
mm.
And that was harder. Uh, the books, as I said, were like really broad. There weren't specific things. And at that time, you could only get native plants one weekend a year in a sale that the East Bay chapter of the California Native Plant Society held, and people would
Mm.
line up like hours ahead of time. And when the gates opened, they would run, they would sprint inside and
Oh,
snatch
wow.
your plants off the shelf.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of overwhelming. And I
Especially when
remember
you're breaking into this world, as everyone else
exactly.
is like, maybe they have a master's or a PhD in horticulture and they
Or they were
really know.
botanists, or they knew, or they were big hikers or something. And I
Yeah.
remember once a guy came up to help me at the Native Plant Society sale, and I didn't know what I wanted. Like, I just knew I wanted a native plant garden that would do well in San Pablo, but I didn't know what I wanted. And he said, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And there was this yellow flowering tree growing just outside the growing grounds, and I said, "That's a nice tree." And he said, "That's an acacia, which comes from Africa as a weedy species." He said, "We don't normally recommend that people garden with acacias." And I was so mortified. And I
Mm.
remember feeling like it shouldn't be this hard
Yeah,
to
it shouldn't be this hard, right?
garden with native plants. And so I did get somebody to come to my yard and give me a consultation. And then I felt like, yes, I can uh, go to any nursery and say, give me 5 of any plants on this list. They're native plants, and
Mm.
I will, be happy. So I took out the Mediterranean plants that East Bay Mud had recommended. I put in these native plants, and then I realized later on, like, oh, there was such a thing as local native plants, and my native plants were really from Southern California.
Mm.
And it might
Mhm.
seem too finicky, but the reason that it matters is there might be insects in Southern California that are not up here. So
Mhm.
your plant is
Mhm.
not really performing its ecological function of providing, food or nectar or shelter if you don't have the creatures here. So the more local your plants are to your site, the better it is ecologically. So at that point, I had my Southern California native plant garden, and over the years, I have been removing that. Most of them are gone now, and I have pretty much a local native plant garden. But on the way, as I started to want to see what people had done, I took a propagation workshop at a local native plant nursery at East Bay, at Native here,
Yeah. So that's
and
the one in Tilden Park
until
in
the
which is at the tip top of Berkeley.
yes. And there was a landscape designer who was leading one of the 3. There was like plant divisions and seeds and cuttings is what we were doing. And I said, I want to see some home gardens, because it didn't work for me to go to the large botanical gardens where they had native plant sections, because my garden was on 3 acres and I didn't have, professional people who knew what they were doing. I just needed
Mm.
my little front and backyard. I couldn't imagine it from seeing these big professionally tended gardens. So I started hosting small garden visit opportunities for people who were interested. And I
Mhm.
was maybe like 10 or 15 people that I would contact in the summertime and say, like, next Wednesday, at 6 o'clock, why don't we meet at this certain garden? And we'd go look at a garden in Berkeley and
Mhm.
check it
Mhm.
out.
And so are you at that point in time driving around neighborhoods and noticing, oh, there's a native garden. I should knock on that front door.
I didn't have the eyeballs for it then. I have the
Okay.
eyeballs for it now. I
Yeah.
did then. So people would suggest to me, like, oh, you
You
could look at this garden here. You could go look at that garden there. I was very new
so you were
at that time.
networking. So you were going to people that were in the know and they were providing you leads.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I would go visit them. And then I resigned from my work at the nonprofit, and I finally thought, well, I had my professional experience in pesticide use reduction, and I
Yeah.
had my passion, which was gardening with native plants, and the two of them fit so perfectly together, because if you have a native plant garden, you really don't need to use any pesticides. Native plants belong here. They were here long before we were here with our pesticides. They don't need them. They're hardy and they do well.
They're hardy, they do well. And then there's also like it gets people out of the mindset of an invertebrate is a pest by its very nature. Wait, no, an invertebrate is a essential part of the web of life, and it's co-evolved with this particular neighborhood of plants.
Right.
And
And
so
the
it's like taking that whole, this is, we need poison because this is something we need to destroy. No, 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 no. We need life. And you can put these two things together and you get more life.
exactly, gardening for wildlife is just such a pleasure. To have a native plant garden, it just it yields so much more than, well, they're beautiful. So I wouldn't say, that they're not beautiful. I just walked outside this morning and there are probably 10 things, in flower in my garden right now.
Yeah.
But also when I first bought this house, there was lawn and Himalayan blackberry and ivy and weird plants from South Africa. There was not much going along ecologically here, but I have since seen 30 species of birds in my little lot in San Pablo. Um,
And so that's so encouraging. I mean, isn't that just, that's exactly what you're doing here, is you're providing that courage to people to try to do the little thing that they can do, which is when you go from the story of the skies would blacken with the migrating birds, you could walk across the backs of the salmon. You can so easily feel completely crushed by that. By there's nothing I could possibly do to make anything right, and things are so wrong. But you said, no, let me try. Let me try with what I have, which is this little postage stamp of land, as all of our Bay Area homes are. They're like a little yard. And then what can I do? How can I figure out to make this work? And you're seeing it does help. It helps.
oh, it does. I have just this year, I put in milkweed and had monarch butterflies lay their eggs here and caterpillars
Wow.
on my milkweed. I had anise swallowtail butterflies lay eggs on um, cow parsnip, which I didn't know that they laid eggs on. Their plant that I was more familiar with is called yampa.
Uh-huh.
And people often plant invasive fennel because
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
anise swallowtail butterflies will lay eggs on fennel, but our local native plants are the best and they're not invasive.
Hmm.
And so I had, caterpillars from anise swallowtail butterflies. I had lots of butterflies in my garden this year. So it really does, if you build it, they really do come to your garden.
If you build it, they will come. And yeah, okay. So the why was actually the vision. It came back to the storytelling. So why did you do this? So you had this uh take two of what color is my parachute, like
Mhm.
internal like pause moment of like, okay, I did that, that was great, I had a whole first career, that was great. Now I have my little boy and I have a new phase of my life. Now what's and then it started with the vision and the storytelling, and then the going back to the piece verb try, right? I'm going to try.
Yeah. And I went again and interviewed people. I went to Portland and they had a garden tour at that time.
Ah,
And it was called Gardens of Natural Delights. And their interest in Portland was not on native plants, but it was on reducing pesticide use. They wanted to reduce the amount of money that government had to spend on disposing of pesticides. So they didn't care what people planted as long as they weren't using pesticides, but they had great program ideas. So the garden guide that I published for many years, the kind of the tone of the guide, the kind of structure of the tour. I went up to Portland and participated in their tour. And then I interviewed people afterward on the phone and asked questions about how they did it. And then I contacted some of my old funders that had funded my
yeah,
programs for many years when I
yeah.
was at the nonprofit and asked if I started this garden tour, if they would come with me, and they did. So I've had many of those funders, Sharon Goslin from Alameda County Public Works Agency,
Hmm.
Rick Morat from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I can't remember some of the others, but I've had steady funding.
Hmm.
Contra Costa Water District, the
Hmm.
Contra Costa Clean Water Program, the Alameda County Clean Water Program have funded the tour, which has allowed me to develop the tour for the last 20 years, which has grown from, a one-day event to a much larger event now.
So I want to bring in just a little thread of economics here. I am so not an economist. Like I'm now working in the private sector, which I didn't do for the first 20 years of my career. So I'm a newbie at this, but what I'm seeing is that uh, financial decisions can really support and help And financial structures can also support and help. So you went from nonprofit to, I believe you're actually,
Just a little
you're
business, a small
right.
business.
So you're not a nonprofit. So
Yeah.
so you didn't have to bring along with you that whole board structure requirement of making decisions with a board and having a director that reports to the board, but you've kept the flavor of the greater good of the work.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you're also modeling a new pathway, which as another small business owner myself, I watch you in this way
Mhm.
because you're saying, I can have the heart of the nonprofit. I can be putting my energy into doing something that is for the greater good, but I am going to do it as a for-profit
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And you still brought on your supporters. And so you talked about in Portland how they didn't care so much about the plants and the habitat, but they did care about how much money they were spending on hazardous waste disposal. And so, so the Clean Water Program has these goals, they need to keep the pesticides out of the water. That's a directive that they've been given through their permits. And also, their mission is that. And so they could say, we can give money to you, you're a business, but we can see that you are providing a service to us
Yeah.
and you are helping us reduce pesticide loadings. There's a total maximum daily load, TMDL, in our urban creeks for pesticide toxicity. This is something we are required to address. You can help us get there. And so then that gives you the stability to actually grow the
Yeah.
program. So as you're a consultant, you're in the world where you have to know what contracts you have coming in so that you know what your 12 months looks like for the profit you have to make. And so your network, your friendships, your like all of that hard work that you did and all of the reputation and success that you built has now helped you move into this new phase of your life and the
Yeah.
garden tour.
Yep, exactly. So it's been, challenging. There are some funds that I can't apply for because I'm not a nonprofit. Sometimes I work with nonprofits and I work with them and collaboratively we apply for funds. But I've just looked
Right.
for different funding mechanisms now. So most of my agencies can still just fund me, even though
Mhm.
I'm a consultant.
Mhm.
And then I request donations, and people support the tour by giving a donation, on the day of the event or before. I've held workshops and um, just kind of developed various income streams that help make this a job because I work on it, all year long. Like it is my job. It's a
Oh, it
full,
is a job. It is,
yeah,
and anyone who's familiar with your tour and gets to be on the receiving end of the end products has these beautifully curated tours, lists, website. I mean, I can tell it's a tremendous amount of work that goes into all of that.
we should tell people in case they want to check it out. It's bringingbackthenatives.net
And
is the
we,
website.
yes, and when people land at this interview, they are going to see all of that hyperlink down below
Okay.
every single place that they are finding you.
Thank
Yeah,
you. So the
absolutely.
tour has grown from a one-day event. In the beginning, it's now a two-day in-person tour. This last year, it takes place in April or May. I had 50 gardens, 50 gardens between Alameda and Contra Costa County open. They are pesticide-free, water conserving, and contain 70% or more natives so that they're
Hmm.
providing good habitat for wildlife. It's now a two-day event. I also, during the pandemic, switched at the last minute, like as the pandemic approached in 2020, I had the in-person tour, all set up. It was a year's worth of work. And then the pandemic was coming,
The pandemic
inexorably.
happened like a month before. It was March 2020 is when we were all told to go home. And
Exactly.
in April 2020 was when you thought people were showing up at gardens.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it was so confusing and
Yeah.
wondering what was happening and wondering, if I had an obligation to cancel the tour and not
Hmm.
have thousands of people visiting gardens, wondering if I had the ability to cancel the tour because I get funding from public agencies. I'd used their money for a year. Like,
Yeah.
what would happen? What would happen if I canceled the tour? Would I not be paid for a year's worth of work? Like, there was a
A
lot in
lot of big
deciding
questions.
what
Yeah.
to do. But I finally did decide to cancel the tour. And I had been working very hard. It was like 5 weeks before the event, and I formally canceled it. And then I took like 10 days off and thought, wow, this is nice. I can hang out with my children and relax and, It was fun. But then I saw the Theodore Payne group in Southern California. They had also been running an in-person tour for years, and their tour was ahead of mine. They'd canceled their tour earlier than I did,
Ah.
and they scrambled and they put on a virtual tour.
Oh, so you're keeping your eyes peeled. You're on the lookout and you have networks. And so you already know who Theodore Payne is in Los Angeles. You know that they're doing parallel work to what you do, and you see how they solved a similar problem.
Actually, I did, but somebody else pointed it out to me. A guy that I didn't even know, he'd registered for the tour. His name is Ethan Bodnar. He runs a landscaping business called Plant Kind now. When I sent out my note saying, I'm sorry, everybody, I've canceled the tour this year, Ethan, who was just like one of my registrants, emailed me and said, I'm so sorry. That must be really hard because you've worked so hard.
Yeah.
Have you thought of putting on a virtual tour? And I thought, that's ridiculous. Of course I haven't. Like, who would put on a virtual garden tour? And also, I'm kind of a technophobe. And I thought, no. And then uh, I came upon this Theodore Payne online tour. Kind of somebody sent me the link, and I'd never done such a thing before. I sat in front of my computer on Zoom. I'd never heard of Zoom for 2 solid days, and I watched their tour. I like made my lunch in the morning so I didn't have to move, and I just sat there all day long watching their tour. And it was so fantastic. On Monday, I called the executive director to ask, how did they do it?
Yeah.
And then I called Ethan, the guy who'd sent me that kind note, and we
Hmm.
talked about it. And I said, if I wanted to do such a thing, would you help me? And
Oh, so you're
he
reaching
said,
out for help again.
again. And he said,
Yeah.
sure. And so I hadn't even met Ethan, but we worked so hard for the next 5 weeks, like to set up, training interviews on Zoom for
Yeah.
my hosts and, figuring out how we would do it and who would come on and
Wow.
do, redoing the registration and the promotion and the links and the instructions. It was so much.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
one of my garden tour hosts, Stephanie Proigel, she is just a very creative person who is also a consultant for the Alameda County Clean Water Program. And I called Stephanie, and I knew she has like a good creative mind, and said, what do you think? Like, if I did this, would you help me? So Stephanie has been my buddy, as has Ethan, in getting this virtual tour run for that first, hard, stressful year.
Hmm.
In 2021, we did it again. And then this year, I had both a virtual tour and an in-person tour that took place this spring.
So you're
And
basically growing your capacity, like you're expanding into more and more capability, and you're doing that together with people, like in a fun and collaborative
yeah,
kind of a way.
yeah. And it
Yeah.
has been very exciting. Like the virtual tour seemed like, just something I would never have thought of, but it's had certainly its advantages.
Right.
And it also launched us into running a series of Zoom webinars on electrification and also on native plant gardening. So we've held these virtual webinars, since then.
Which means you can reach more people. More people can
Exactly.
participate. And so you don't get that, not everyone is there feeling the breeze, smelling the sage, seeing the flitting of the butterfly, but they're still getting exposed, and they're still getting excited, and they're still getting educated. And then you can bring it out into the electrification, which is obviously another important direction for supporting planetary survival, to move away from the fossil fuels.
Yes. So, a number of people have emailed me that they even prefer the virtual tour because
Hmm.
they said I can visit more gardens. I don't have to
Hmm.
drive around.
Hmm.
I have the hosts. I have the host to myself completely. Like during the 20-minute presentation, they said the host is just there talking to me. I never get 20 minutes with the host at a garden.
Oh,
And I can hear better because, I'm at home, or I know what gardens now I want to go and see. So the virtual tour had its advantages for sure. And then because we were launched on the virtual path, my husband and I this is a digression from my career, but kind of not really. My husband and I did a big home remodel in
Mhm.
2020 during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And as we were remodeling, we found out about the importance of getting gas out of our homes, so that those big gas pipes are not leaking methane, coming from far away to our cities. Um,
Mhm.
and we're not burning gas. And there are health reasons to get rid of gas in your home, like asthma in adults, emphysema, asthma in children,
Mhm.
lowered IQ in children,
Mhm.
uh, just all kinds of problems with having gas in your stove, heating your home with gas. So anyway, we during our remodeling project, we changed out my beautiful Wedgwood stove is gone. Now I have an induction range. Our gas burning old passive gas furnace is gone. We got a heat pump. Our gas burning dryer is gone. We got an electric dryer.
Mhm.
We got solar panels, an electric vehicle. So I've expanded now into helping people. And it was so hard for us. And I realized, oh, it's kind of like when I started the garden tour, that it
Yeah.
just shouldn't be this hard to electrify. I interviewed
Yeah.
7 companies about our heat pump before we selected our heat pump company. And it was a big learning curve. So we held a workshop on heat pumps last fall. And I was amazed that 350 people would watch our heat pump workshop live, and more than 1,000 people have watched that heat pump um, video on the tour's YouTube page.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I know there's a lot of interest.
And you would never have gotten that many people into your home, for example, if you were doing a
No,
tour and or into an auditorium. Can you imagine the cost, logistics? Yeah, so there's a
I,
lot that is to be gained from this whole 2020 uh
yes,
pause.
yeah. So the tour now I'm calling it the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour and Green Home Features Showcase, because if people
Mhm.
have native plant gardens that qualify for the tour, but they also have solar panels or heat pumps or whatever, they're also showing them to people who come to visit on the day of the tour, or we're doing virtual tours on them. And the tour now, just to kind of summarize where we are with the tour, more than 200,000 people have made visits to native plant gardens since the tour's inception in 2005. And the tour's YouTube channel has more than 2,000, about 2,000 subscribers and about 100 videos on native plant gardening and electrification. So I kind of
Wow, congratulations
thank you.
from taking your own little statement, this shouldn't be so hard. And then it isn't so hard anymore. It isn't so
Yeah,
hard. You can actually go to your website, the bringing back the natives.net, and you can get plant lists. You can see photos from different gardens. You can take little classes or little your videos on how to do different parts of the conversion process. And so, all of those resources you didn't have 20 years ago, we have now.
yeah.
We have now. And so
There's
all
a
these
section
little,
on find a designer, find a nursery.
yeah.
Um, every garden that's ever been on the tour can be viewed with the description and the pictures and the plant list. So it really is a fantastic resource for people who are interested in native plant gardening. There's also some talks by Doug Tallamy. And if people are not familiar with Doug Tallamy, he is just such an inspirational speaker and so motivating. And he presents the case for like why all of us should be gardening with native plants, even if it's just a few native plants in your garden and you add more to them later, or you have a pot that you're looking for something to put into, or you have a tree that needs replacing. And you can see Doug Tallamy's videos on the Garden Tours YouTube page. And he's really been an inspiration to me. He really reinvigorated me.
He's
Um,
he's another person who's basically said, "What can I do from where I am?" And he's a scientist. I think he's an entomologist. Am I right?
yes, he is. Yeah.
And he's also a fantastic communicator. And in the same way that you were talking about, I think Marco Margolin was his name.
Malcolm Margolin.
Malcolm
Yeah.
Margolin, to
Mhm.
paint a picture. I have tuned in to Doug being interviewed by you. I can't remember what was it, last year or the year before,
Mhm.
and I also felt re-energized. And I thought, I because it speaks to hope, doesn't it? To say one oak tree, one potted plant, one switch out, so that you don't feel like I can't do this because it's so big. Well, no, I can do one, and if that one doesn't work, I can try another one.
Mhm.
until I figure out the one that does work. And so you're both seeding hope, and it's just wonderful. It's wonderful to be exposed to you and to Doug. It's really a blessing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, Kathy. Wow, you brought us 30 years of a journey, maybe even a little bit more than that. Is there have we heard all the piece verbs? Have we heard all of the parts of the story that you thought about in getting ready for this conversation?
I think so. I think the last thing that I would like to say is, since what I do is encourage people to garden with native plants, is to think about your own garden and think about what you can do in your own garden. And certainly, I think that um, people who want to grow food, they should grow all the food that they want to. Like, I don't
Mm,
think about food when I think about what people should do with their garden. But when people are making the other choices, if there
the
are plants,
aesthetic choices.
pardon me,
When people are making the aesthetic choices, when people
exactly.
are making the water conservation choices.
Right. And there's also some things that go into that choice. Like maybe, your mother had roses and you want those roses, or, your husband's from the Mediterranean and you really love, lavender and thyme and rosemary, then you should have those things. But if people don't really love a plant, they might want to think like, do I really love this plant? It's kind of the Marie Kondo approach to gardening is what I'm thinking
Hmm.
of these days.
Hmm.
If you don't love it, then why not replace it with something that can be just as beautiful, but is really ecologically valuable. And in that way, we can really make out of our cities places for nature to live as well as for us to live. And I know in
Yes.
my own case, like our garden is so beautiful. And it's such a pleasure to be out in our garden that I've thought so many times, like we don't, as we go out for lunch, my husband and I both work at home and we eat outside. I thought, we don't have to go to Hawaii. Like we have this beautiful garden that we just sit in and watch the birds and the butterflies. And it's just such a pleasure to have nature be in your own yard.
And it could be so you have how many square feet do you have, Kathy, in your
Our
garden?
lot is 5,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So we've got a house on it. So
Yeah.
our garden area is maybe, 2,500 square feet at the most. We got a driveway, 2,000 square
Yeah.
feet. It's
So
not
you
a
and I
lot.
have the same size, same
Yeah.
size. I think it's pretty typical here. But even yet, if you have a patio, if you have a median strip, there's endless opportunities for native plant gardens,
Hmm.
and to be inspired that every single little pot, every single little patch matters.
Hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's been so fun for me, like I said, having known you for over 20 years, to get the backstory and to just delight with you in the fun that you've had in reaching out to different people to be part of your journey. And I still love that you could call your trigonometry coach and he would recognize your voice.
You would. Well, I want to thank you for inviting me. It was fun kind of thinking about, my path through life and how I got here, and to say that it happened that I just had a wonderful career and met my husband through my job and have really had a wonderful life. So it's worth kind of thinking about how to try to. I'm hoping that my children, are lucky enough to find their passion and be able to pursue it and make a career out of it. And I hope that they both, and they are actually, I was going to say travel. My son has been to Japan. He's there now teaching English. He was in
Hmm.
Japan volunteering through WOOF before, the Worldwide Organic Farm Network. He went to
Hmm.
Thailand as an 18-year-old. So
Is this
uh,
the same son that also biked across the country?
he biked across the country last summer.
Yeah.
So he's getting a taste of life that I hope, helps him find his passion, whatever it might be.
And he's also benefiting from the pathway that you'd already traveled, something sort of that sort. So as a
Mhm.
parent, you're not attaching a nervousness to that. Like, I mean, I'm sure you are. You cannot be a mother and not be a little bit nervous, right? Yet there's a sense of that's good. Rather than, oh my goodness, what is he doing with his life? Why isn't he buckling down? Where's the financial career path? It's more of an allowance that you're giving him, and a trust, and a prayer or a wish for his well-being, and figuring that out for himself.
Exactly. And if people are interested in seeing tracking Peter's bike ride across the United States last summer, he biked alone 4,600 miles, and
Oh
he's
my
got a
gosh.
website where
Yeah.
he kept a great blog, and it is CA the number 2MA.com, which is California to Massachusetts.com, because that's where he ended his ride. And
Wow.
he really did a fabulous job of, writing about his experiences biking alone across the states. Well, anyway, that was just a little digression about travel and its importance. And
Yeah, and the nurturing, and I'm not a parent, but I'm related to many parents, and I just admire so much the letting a piece of your heart go out into the world, and the being someone who can receive a phone call but still allow that. So there's a lot of trust and a lot of love that goes into parenting a young person that's off doing
yeah,
that kind of adventuring.
yeah,
Yeah. Wow, Kathy. Well, so I think we can wrap it up. Yeah.
I think so too. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me today. I enjoyed it.
Oh, me too. Me too.